My name is Tori Bennett. I'm 34 years old, and last November my father called to tell me I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving. Not because of a fight, not because of anything I'd done, because of my job, because what I do for a living might embarrass my brother in front of his wealthy new in-laws. My mother needed the table to look right, and apparently I was the one thing on it she couldn't dress up. So they set my chair aside, told the in-laws I was traveling for work, and served my grandmother's rolls without me. But here's what none of them knew. The company those fancy in-laws had just signed their biggest contract with, the founder they'd been praising at their own dinner table for weeks, had my name on the door. And 4 weeks later, at a party with 80 witnesses, one polite question would take my family's perfect picture apart piece by piece. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet women finally get heard. Grab your coffee and settle in. If you've ever been the one your family edits out of the picture, this story is for you. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, to the girl they called the warehouse girl. I started loading produce trucks on the night shift when I was 19. 4 a.m. starts, frost on the dock plates, pallets of sweet corn heavier than I was. I'd come home smelling like diesel and cardboard, sleep 4 hours, then sit in the back row of an evening accounting class at the community college with grocery store coffee and a used textbook. At 22, I bought my first refrigerated truck at a repo auction. It had a dent in the fender shaped like Ohio, which felt like a sign, or at least a discount. I named the company Harvest Route Logistics because it was the most honest name I could think of. We hauled food. We kept it cold. We showed up on time. 12 years later, Harvest Route had 140 employees, 62 refrigerated trucks, and 2 warehouses out by the Rickenbacker cargo hub south of Columbus. I signed the front of 140 paychecks every other Friday. At my parents' table, I was still figuring things out. That was the family shorthand for my entire life. Tori works in a warehouse, not owns, works in. My brother Kyle managed rich people's money in a glass office downtown, and that got a toast at dinner. I kept half the produce aisles in central Ohio cold, and that got a subject change. You'd think it would sting less after a decade. It doesn't. It just gets quieter. Somewhere around year 3, I stopped correcting them. Somewhere around year 5, I stopped mentioning the company at all. People ask me why a grown woman would let her family believe she was barely getting by. There's an answer to that, and it isn't pretty, and to give it to you, I have to show you my mother's kitchen. My mother, Sandra, is 61 and has spent her whole life climbing a ladder only she can see. She grew up the daughter of a plumber in a rented duplex, and she never forgave the house for it. Every Christmas card photo of my childhood was retaken a dozen times, chins up, labels out, smile like we mean it. My father, Raymond, is 64, retired from managing an insurance claims office, and he measures human beings the way he measured claims, by the paperwork. A title on a business card was proof of value. Calloused hands were a liability. And then there's Kyle, 31, my little brother. Pressed shirts, whitened teeth, an associate's desk at a wealth management firm where he was, as far as I could tell, in charge of nodding. Kyle was the one who turned out. Those are my mother's words, said in front of me, more than once, with love. Sunday dinners at their house in Westerville ran on a script. Kyle's week got the full broadcast. Every client lunch, every compliment from a partner, replayed twice. My week got, and Tori's still at the warehouse. Anyway, I used to time it. 11 seconds on average, between my name and the word anyway. My grandmother Ruth was the only one who ever asked follow-up questions, and she'd been gone 6 years. So I did what quiet daughters do. I brought the green beans. I fixed the wobbly hinge on their storm door. I let the word warehouse sit on me like a coat that didn't fit, because arguing with my mother about my own worth felt like buying a ticket to a game she owned the referee of. Then Kyle met Madison Hartwell, and the invisible ladder in my mother's head grew a penthouse. Madison Hartwell was, by any measure my mother respected, a jackpot. Her family owned Hartwell Family Foods, the jam and preserves company out of Cincinnati, 3 generations old. The kind of brand that sits behind glass at the nice grocery stores with a little gold label and a price that makes you check twice. Her father, Grant, ran the company. Her mother, Celeste, ran the family. They had a foundation, a heritage barn on the original orchard property, and a last name that opened doors my mother had been knocking on her whole life. When Kyle proposed, my mother cried for 2 days. The good kind of crying, the kind she could describe at church. Then she went to work. She bought new table linens. She practiced saying charcuterie until it stopped rhyming with cutlery. She started referring to us as our little family, in a voice I'd never heard before, soft and rehearsed, like she was auditioning for the role of herself. Kyle sat us all down before the first dinner with Madison and said, and I quote, "Just keep it classy." He looked at me when he said it. Here's the twist nobody in my family saw coming. Madison was lovely, not polished lovely. Actually lovely. She remembered my name, asked what I did, listened to the answer for as long as I was willing to give it, which by then was about 1 sentence. The Hartwells weren't the problem. My family's idea of the Hartwells was the problem. And as the engagement party got closer, I watched my mother do something I'd seen her do my whole life, but never this openly. She started assigning roles. Kyle, the rising star. Dad, the steady provider. Herself, the gracious matriarch. She got all the way down the cast list, and there was no part written for me. The engagement party was the last weekend of October, in a rented event room with string lights and a cheese table my mother had photographed before anyone touched it. I wore my good blazer. I'd just come off a brutal week. We'd onboarded a new dairy client and I'd been on the dock at 5 that morning, but I showed up smiling, because that's the job of a sister. My mother took my elbow and steered me through introductions like a realtor showing the one room she hadn't renovated. "This is our daughter Tori," she said, to a couple from the country club, to Madison's aunt, to anyone. "She's between things right now." Between things. I owned 2 warehouses. I had a fleet. I had a payroll bigger than the guest list. Kyle got the longer version. Wealth management, downtown, very bright future. At some point he clinked his glass and made a joke about how his sister could drive a forklift if the band needed their equipment moved, and the room laughed. And I laughed too, because the alternative was making a scene at my brother's engagement party, and quiet daughters don't do that. One thing happened that night that I didn't think about again for weeks. Grant Hartwell shook my hand on his way to the bar. He was tall, gray at the temples, comfortable in a room the way only men who sign the checks are. He held my grip a second longer than polite and glanced down. "Working hands," he said. "Don't lose those." Then he was gone, and nobody heard it but me. That night I did something I'd never done. I called my mother and told her the truth. That between things was a lie, and it hurt. And next time I'd introduce myself. She was warm as bathwater. "Of course, honey. Of course." 3 weeks later, I found out what "of course" meant in my mother's language. The news came at Sunday dinner, delivered like a state announcement. The Hartwells were coming to Thanksgiving. All 3 of them, Grant, Celeste, and Madison, driving up from Cincinnati to eat at my parents' table in Westerville. Madison had pushed for it. She wanted the families close, wanted her parents to know Kyle's people before the wedding. My mother said yes before the question was finished, and then she went to war. Within a week, there was a tasting menu. An actual tasting menu, for Thanksgiving, the holiday whose entire menu was invented before any of us were born. She hired the neighbor kid to re-edge the flower beds in November, when nothing was blooming and nobody would see them under coats. She borrowed crystal glasses from her friend Lorraine and washed them twice. I stood in her kitchen on a Saturday while she laid 3 napkin options on the counter like surgical tools, and that's when she said it. The sentence that would follow our family around for the rest of this story. "We need this table to look right." She didn't even look up when she said it. It wasn't cruel. That's what I want you to understand. It was worse than cruel. It was operational. I said I'd bring Grandma Ruth's dinner rolls, the ones from her recipe box, the ones I'd made every Thanksgiving since she passed. My mother said that would be fine. I remember being pleased. I remember actually feeling grateful to be assigned a dish, the way you feel grateful for scraps when you've decided scraps are a kind of love. What I didn't know was that other conversations were already happening. Twice that week, my father's phone lit up on the counter with Kyle's name, and both times my father took it in the garage. The call came on a Tuesday night in the middle of November. I was standing in my kitchen with flour on my hands, testing Grandma Ruth's roll recipe because the oven in my townhouse runs hot and I wanted them perfect. My father's name on the screen. Dad never called. Dad was handed the phone at the end of Mom's calls like a notary. Tori. He cleared his throat twice and I heard paper. I swear to you I heard actual paper, like notes. Your mother and I have been talking. About Thursday. And we think, well, maybe this year isn't the year. I asked what that meant. He walked me through it with the gentle, reasonable voice he used to deny people's claims for 30 years. The Hartwells were a certain kind of people. Established people. There would be questions, natural questions. What do you do questions? And honey? A warehouse. How do we dress that up? There it was. I looked at the flour on my hands. He kept going, filling my silence with the script. This was Kyle's night. Kyle needed this to go well. Surely I understood. We'd do a little dinner, just us, sometime after the holidays. Then, softer. Like it explained everything. Your mother needs this table to look right. I asked him one question. Did Kyle ask for this, or did Mom? The pause went on so long I could hear their refrigerator humming in Westerville. That pause was the honest answer, and both of us knew it. So he didn't try to build another one. I said I understood. I didn't. But I said it, because I've been saying it my whole life, because holding a family together is a job somebody has to volunteer for, and I'd been volunteering since I was old enough to carry a casserole. I hung up. I stood in my kitchen holding a recipe card for rolls nobody wanted, and then the phone rang again. It was my office. It was Denise, my chief operating officer, who has been with me 10 years and calls after hours only when something is worth it. You sitting down or wallowing? She said. Both, I said. Good, because this is the strangest folder I've ever been sent. A procurement broker out of Cincinnati had contacted us. A request for proposal. Sent blind, client name withheld. Codename, Project Orchard. A family-owned specialty food company, established brand, preparing a major retail expansion across the Midwest, seeking a refrigerated logistics partner for the whole program. Full cold chain, warehouse to shelf. If we won it, it would be the largest contract in Harvest Roots history. Denise read me the client's stated requirements over the phone, and one of them made me laugh out loud for the first time that night. The client wanted a partner with, quote, family-run values. Family-run values. I'd just been uninvited from Thanksgiving by my own parents, and here was a mystery company across the state, willing to pay real money for exactly the thing my family couldn't see from 3 feet away. Life doesn't usually hand you your irony that fast. Usually, you have to wait years. I told Denise we were going after it with everything on the shelf. If my family wanted me invisible that November, fine. I know what to do with an empty calendar. I do what I have always done since I was 19 years old on a frozen dock. I work. Before I tell you who is behind that folder, tell me in the comments. Has your family ever hidden what you do for a living? I read every comment on these videos. And if you've ever been left off a guest list so a table could look right, hit subscribe. You'll want to see how this dinner ends. We had 3 weeks to build the pitch, and I treated it like a harvest. You sleep after, not during. Denise pulled our safety record and our on-time numbers, 5 years of them, clean as a new windshield. Our operations lead mapped a route plan with temperature checkpoints from dock to shelf, every handoff accounted for, because with preserves and fresh pack products, the difference between premium and garbage is a few degrees on a July afternoon. Our competition, the broker let slip, was 2 national firms. The kind with skyscraper addresses and account managers who rotate every 8 months. So I did the thing national firms don't do. At 4 in the morning on a Sunday, I drove the Columbus to Cincinnati corridor myself in one of our reefers, timing every leg, noting every construction zone, checking where a driver could actually stop, because a route plan drawn by someone who has never sat in the seat is fiction with a logo on it. I drove home as the sun came up over the flat fields along the interstate, and I felt like myself for the first time in weeks. The pitch was in a rented conference room at the broker's office in Cincinnati. Halfway through, I noticed the frosted glass panel along the side wall, and behind it, shapes. The client was in the building, watching, listening, unseen. I remember thinking, somebody wants to know who we are when we can't perform for them. I like them for that. I closed the way I always close. Big logistics firms will sell you software, I said. I'll sell you the name of the driver who will knock on your dock door. And if anything ever goes wrong at 2 a.m, the phone that rings is mine. The shapes behind the glass didn't move. 2 days later, the broker called. They chose you, the broker said. Unanimous. I sat down on a stack of pallet wrap, which is not dignified, and I didn't care. The terms were simple and a little strange. The client's identity would be disclosed at contract signing, not before. Big families and big brands are private like that. I'd seen it before and thought nothing of it. What I remember from that afternoon is the warehouse. Denise ordered pizza for both shifts, and my drivers stood around the break room in their thermal jackets grinning like we'd won a playoff game. Because we had. Ray Delgado, who has driven for me for 11 years, pulled me aside by the time clock. Not to talk about the contract. Boss, my kid made the honor roll, he said. First time. Wanted you to know. That's what I was building. Not a warehouse. A place where a man's first thought after good news is to tell somebody who will actually be happy for him. I understand some of you already see where this is going. I promise you, standing in that break room with pizza grease on my sleeve, I did not. The broker passed along one line from the client's debrief that I wrote on a sticky note and kept on my monitor for a month. They said the founder showed up herself. The big guys sent slide decks. Somebody out there gave me the credit my own family would have found embarrassing. Denise raised her can of soda that night and said, "Here's hoping they're not psychos." I laughed. It's a jam company, Denise. How dramatic can jam people be? I want you to remember I said that, because the signing was set for the week of Thanksgiving, and the universe was already setting the table. I need to tell you about my grandmother, because none of the rest of this makes sense without her. Ruth Bennett ran a diner off Route 40 for 31 years. Vinyl booths, bottomless coffee, rolls she made at 4 a.m. because, she said, dough is honest at that hour. I spent my summers there, wiping counters and watching her feed truckers and teachers and the occasional judge, all at the same counter, all charged the same. Feed people right, she told me once, flour to her elbows, and you'll never be small. She was the only person at any family table who asked me follow-up questions. When she died 6 years ago, she left me 3 things: her recipe box, her apron, and a thin gold bracelet she wore on her right wrist, her working hand. Here's the part that answers the question from earlier, about why I let my family believe I was barely getting by. The year before she died, my parents threw a big catered birthday party for my mother. I just bought our second warehouse. I drove over in one of the new trucks, white, clean, our Harvest Basket logo on the side. Because I was proud, and I wanted, one time, to be seen. My mother met me in the driveway before I could even shut the door. "Honey, could you park that around the block?" The neighbors. Around the block. I parked it around the block. I stood at that party for 3 hours and told nobody my news, and that was the day I stopped mentioning the company. Not out of shame, out of arithmetic. You stop making deposits where the account only ever reads 0. One more thing about Ruth's Diner. On the shelf by the register, all those years, she stocked little gold-labeled jars of a fancy jam out of Cincinnati. Hartwell's. The Saturday before Thanksgiving, Kyle's leased German sedan pulled into my driveway. First time in months. He came in, declined coffee, complimented my townhouse the way you compliment a hotel room, and got to it. "So, Thursday," he said, hands in his pockets. "Look, it wasn't my idea, but since it's happening, Mom wanted me to go over a couple things. If it ever comes up with the Hartwells, what you do?" I waited. Watching my little brother rehearse is one of the few free entertainments left in this economy. Just say you're in shipping. Keep it vague. Actually, he glanced at his phone, and I realized he was reading from notes, just like Dad. "Mom thinks maybe don't mention work at all." There it was. They had scripted me even in my absence. A walk-on role with no lines, played from another city. I kept my voice level, which by then was a skill I could have taught at the community college. "I won't lie about my life, Kyle, but don't worry, I won't be at the table to embarrass anyone." He had the decency to wince, and not the decency to argue. And that's when I understood he'd known about the disinvite before Dad ever called me. Probably sat in the kitchen while it was decided, nodding, the thing he's professionally best at. He left with a handshake. An actual handshake, like we'd concluded a meeting. I stood in my driveway watching his taillights, and finally put words to the thing that had been sitting on my chest for a week. They weren't hiding my job. My job was 2 warehouses, 62 trucks, and 140 families with health insurance. They were hiding me. On the Monday of Thanksgiving week, I drove out to Westerville with the rolls. I'd made them anyway. 3 dozen, from Ruth's recipe card, packed in the tin she used to use, because being uninvited from the table didn't mean my grandmother had to be. My mother answered the door in her apron with her reading glasses pushed up in her hair, and she did not ask me in. She took the tin at the threshold like a delivery, which, I suppose, is what I was now. Behind her, I could see the dining room staged like a magazine shoot, the borrowed crystal, the new linens, and on the sideboard, a hand-drawn seating chart. I have very good eyes. 15 years of reading manifests off a clipboard at dawn will do that. There were 6 names on that chart. Mine was not one of them. And the chair where I have sat every Thanksgiving of my adult life, left side, near the kitchen, because I'm the one who gets up to help, had a new name inked in my mother's careful cursive. Grant H. She saw me seeing it. To her credit, she didn't pretend. To her greater discredit, this is what she said, adjusting her glasses like the matter was clerical. Don't be dramatic, sweetheart. It's one dinner. We need this table to look right. That sentence again. The family motto, 3 for 3. I said, enjoy the rolls. And I walked back to my car. And I want to be honest with you about that drive home. I cried from the Westerville exit to my own garage, one time, quietly, with the radio off. Then I was done. The next morning, our attorney sent over the Project Orchard contract, ready for signature. And everything changed shape. We signed in our conference room, the one that overlooks the dock, because I like clients to see trucks moving while they commit to us. The client was signing remotely. Their pages had come through that morning, executed first, which is a courtesy you don't see much. The contract sat in front of me, thick as a phone book. I flipped to the signature page the way I always do. I read names before I read numbers, a habit from Ruth, who said you should always know whose hand you're shaking. And there it was, in navy ink, above a line of type I had to read 3 times before my eyes agreed to it. Hartwell Family Foods, LLC, Grant Hartwell, President. The room went very quiet, or I did. Project Orchard. An orchard. The original orchard property. The heritage barn. The gold-labeled jars on Ruth's diner shelf. The tall man at the engagement party looking down at my grip. Working hands. Don't lose those. My brother was marrying into the family whose entire Midwest expansion was about to ride on my trucks, and none of them had any idea. And in roughly 48 hours, the Hartwells were going to sit down at my parents' Thanksgiving table, in front of a seating chart that had traded my name for theirs. I did not celebrate, and I did not panic. I picked up the phone and called our attorney, and I asked her one question. Is there a conflict? She walked the fence line of it and came back clean. A client's daughter engaged to my brother is a relationship, not a conflict. No ownership crosses, no money crosses, nothing crosses but a wedding aisle. I documented the connection in an email to her and Denise the same hour, so the record would show we flagged it ourselves, on day 1. Then I signed my name the way I always do. Small letters. No flourish. That night, I sat at my kitchen counter with my phone in front of me and my thumb over Kyle's name. Twice I picked it up. Twice I set it down. Walk it with me, because I've walked it 100 times since. If I called and said, your future father-in-law just signed the biggest logistics deal in my company's history, what happens? It becomes a thing I did. A grenade I rolled under their perfect table. My mother spins it by morning. Tori's trying to make the wedding about herself. And there was something else. Something cleaner than fear. They had given me an instruction, in writing, through their appointed messenger in his nice sedan. Don't mention work at all. For once in my life, my family's wishes and my professional obligations pointed the same direction. My client valued privacy. My mother demanded silence. Fine. I would give them both exactly what they asked for. Denise, when I told her the whole picture over coffee the next morning, put down her cup and said the sentence I've repeated to myself ever since. You didn't build a trap, Tori. You built a company. If the walls close in on them, that's architecture, not revenge. So I made myself one rule, and I want you to hold me to it as this story goes on. I would not fire the first shot. I would not drop hints, make calls, or arrange a reveal. But if anyone, client, parent, or God herself, asked me a direct question, I was done lying about my life. The truth could stay home, but if someone opened the door, it was allowed to walk through. First delivery under the new contract was scheduled for the Friday after Thanksgiving. The two halves of my life were now one day apart on the same calendar. Thanksgiving Eve, my mother called, sugar from the first syllable, which with her is a weather warning. She wanted to align on details, she said. Align. If the Hartwells happen to ask about me. And they probably won't, honey. People don't really... She caught herself. But we both heard the end of that sentence. The family would simply say I was traveling for work. You understand. It's simpler. Traveling for work. I looked out my kitchen window at the dark and thought. I built a company specifically so other people could do the traveling. Then came the second request. And this one I want you to hear plainly. She asked for the roll recipe. Ruth's recipe. Because Kyle had mentioned the rolls to Madison as a family thing, and wouldn't it be sweet if it was, quote, the recipe he grew up making? My brother has never made anything in an oven but reservations, and we both knew it. I told her the rolls were already in her freezer, in the tin, and she could tell people whatever story fit the tablecloth. The table needs to look right, I said. She thanked me and missed the tone entirely, or chose to. And here's where I'll tell you what I actually did on Thanksgiving, because I don't want your pity. I want you to see it. I took the eve shift at the warehouse with the skeleton crew, the drivers and dock hands who keep holiday freight moving while the rest of the country basted turkeys. I ordered a full spread delivered to the break room. And late that night, two things happened at almost the same hour, 25 miles apart. My mother set out her good candles in Westerville, and the first trailer with Hartwell family food stenciled on the side backed into my dock.